Why are Armenia and Azerbaijan back to the brink of all-out war? Dozens killed in a flare-up of July's tensions in the separatist Armenian-speaking enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. This time it's escalated, with both sides declaring martial law and competing images to back up rival claims. It's escalated and could escalate even further. What with Turkey jumping to Azerbaijan's defense and President Recep Tayep Erdogan pulling no punches this time. What is Ankara's next move? What response from Russia in a standoff that pits against each other two former Soviet republics? When Nikol Pashinyan became Armenia's prime minister in 2018, there was hope of a settlement to a border dispute that started before even the breakup of the USSR. Thousands died in the early 1990s. Why does it seem like it might be back to square one? What will it take to make peace? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if it could be all-out war. And joining us is Thornike Gordadze, lecturer at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, former Minister of European Integration for Georgia. Thanks for being with us. I want to thank from Baku diplomat Elchin Amirbayov, former Azerbaijani ambassador to France. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting.
From Aix-en-Provence in southern France, we'll be joined by Taline Papazian, lecturer in Middle East Studies at the University of Aix-Marseille. And from London, Lawrence Brewers, Associate Fellow at the Russia and Eurasia program of Chatham House. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, #F24debate. Get ready to defend our sacred homeland, said the Armenian Prime Minister on Facebook. Our cause is just and we will win, Azerbaijan's president stated on national television. Valerie de Kemp has more on the escalation that's unfolded since this weekend.
As heavy fighting continues in the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region, both sides claim to have the upper hand. A video released by the army of the breakaway region shows the remains of tanks and what they say are the bodies of Azerbaijani soldiers, proof that Azeri forces have suffered considerable losses. Armenia's defense ministry adding that its army has won back positions that had been taken by Azerbaijan. But Baku is hitting back with its own footage, releasing drone images of airstrikes conducted overnight and showing Armenian military equipment and vehicles being destroyed. Clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan erupted on Sunday, reigniting concerns over stability in the region. Armenia has now accused Turkey of interfering in the conflict, claiming that thousands of its fighters have been deployed from northern Syria.
Ուզում եմ հայտարարել, որ մեզ հետ կռվում է ոչ թե Ադրբեջանը, մեզ հետ կռվում է նաև Թուրքիան։ Օգտագործում են թուրքական բանակի արկայության, ավելի ձեռքի տակ եղած հիմնական ժամանակակից զենքերն ու զինամթերքները։ Անօթաչու եւ ինքնաթիռներ։
Azerbaijan has described the allegations as mere rumors and a provocation. The two former Soviet republics have clashed periodically since the 1990s, when ethnic Armenians seized the Nagorno-Karabakh region, a conflict that claimed 30,000 lives.
So, Elchin Amirbayov, you had 4 days of shooting back in July, the worst since 2016. And now this. Why is it escalating?
Well, thank you once again for inviting me. I think yesterday's act of aggression by Armenia must be seen in a broader context of a series of provocations which are carried out by Armenian government. And they started even before the Armenian attack at the border with Azerbaijan in July, as you mentioned. Armenia, to start with, has been illegally occupying Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 surrounding regions of Azerbaijan for 27 years, since 1993, and the principal goal of Armenia ever since has been to preserve this illegal status quo of foreign occupation, of ethnic cleansing, and gross violations of international humanitarian law, like, for example, illegal settlements of persons of Armenian origin, most recently from the Middle East, in the occupied territories to change the demographic situation in the region. But Azerbaijan is today carrying out the counteroffensive in its sovereign territory, which is recognized as such by international community, and in the exercise of its rights to individual self-defense in accordance with the UN Charter. But
was there a troop buildup that began last week, as has been reported?
Well, basically, it started, yes. I mean, I should tell that we have to look at this as a continuum, because if you look what happened on the ground from the Armenian part since July, there were a series of events which are qualified by us as provocations and the preparation by Armenia for a new offensive. Let me just mention a couple of them. First of all, the intensive and continuous arms deliveries to Armenia in the course of July and August. The announced plan of Armenian government to mobilize up to 100,000 persons in militia units to support the armed forces. The intensification of illegal practice of settlements in the occupied territories. The plans to hold 2 joint military exercises with the Collective Security Treaty Organization in October, 2 of them in Armenia. Then frequent visits by Armenian leaders to the occupied territories, including the so-called inauguration of self-styled leader of Nagorno-Karabakh in Shusha, which is a place very dear to Azerbaijani people and is part of our national identity. And I'm not mentioning the deployment of hundreds of fighters and mercenaries from Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon by Armenia recently in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan.
All right, let me bring in Laurence Burz on this, because you did mention it. Is that true that there's mercenaries on both sides?
Well, I cannot.
Well, there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of claims circulating in social media that there are mercenaries for both sides in the combat zone. These are unconfirmed reports as yet. So I don't think that we can say with any certainty who is actually fighting as mercenaries on the ground. I think that remains to be established. There is always an interval on day 2, day 3, when we don't have much information about what's actually happening on the ground in the combat zone. Martial law has been declared. Journalists and reporters can only report certain kinds of information. So I think it's too early to call on that factor.
And what about, you heard Elchin mention there a number of grievances that had built up. How do you explain yourself, Laurence Burz, why it's coming to a head?
Well, I think there are a number of short-term, mid-term, and long-term drivers. In the short term, we had the July escalation that ended worse for Azerbaijan, heavy losses at that time. And as Mr. Amirbayev mentioned, have a number of controversial announcements. Another one is the green light given to a third road crossing the occupied territories between the southern Armenian town of Kapan and the town of Hadrut in Nagorno-Karabakh itself. I think we also have to recognize that the pandemic has been a difficult period. There are going to be economic consequences. There may be unrest. And back in July, we had a spontaneous protest in Azerbaijan calling for war with Armenia in support of the army. And that's a very difficult kind of protest to quell and to put back into the box. So in that sense, military action could be seen as a popular move. In the midterm, there is disappointment, I think, with Armenia's Velvet Revolution, with Nikol Pashinyan. There were perhaps unreasonable, naive expectations of a reset in the peace process. And beyond that, we have the long-term frustration for Azerbaijan of a peace process that hasn't really delivered much in the way of results. It goes on indefinitely in the long run. The more that we see becoming embedded, and a sense of hopelessness and frustration in Azerbaijan that leads to a belief that only through destabilizing the ceasefire can it achieve leverage.
Taline Papazian is with us from Aix-en-Provence in the south of France. There's 2018, that so-called Velvet Revolution that happens in Armenia, followed by several summits that took place between the two leaders of the two neighboring countries there. There were hopes. You heard the criticism that Lawrence Burrs mentioned that's been leveled against the Prime Minister of Armenia, that he's more now turned towards populism instead of towards finding some kind of a lasting solution when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yes, I heard Lawrence better actually than Mr. Amirbayev. I'm sorry, the connection is not working wonderfully well. What can be said is that Lawrence, I agree with you. I completely agree with him when he says that maybe there were naive hopes that when Pashinyan came to power, because he was a newly elected leader, totally different from the previous Karabakh clan that used to rule Armenia for decades, for 2 decades, maybe hopes were a little too high. But to his credit, we have to remind the audience that Pashinyan called for a peace that would be acceptable to all people, to the three people that are the three parties in this conflict. So the Armenian people, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, and the Azerbaijan people. And then it's up to the political leaders of all parties to build up on those momentum and to come to terms together.
Unfortunately, Taline, the Skype gods are not with us right now, so we're going to try to fix the audio, which keeps dipping in and out, and have you patched in properly so we can get everything. So apologies for that. Tornike Gordadze, your thoughts on why it's happening now?
Fortunately, it's not a surprise for me because when you have this conflict that started 30 years ago, even more than 30 years ago, and when the ceasefire was signed in 1994, and since then there is not an agreement between the countries. This is something that is always like boiling, and people call it, the specialists call it a frozen conflict, but the conflict cannot be frozen because people live there, the countries have their agenda, they have their elections, they have their political processes. So this is something that couldn't stand forever. And
it's gotten worse, you might say, right? Because people don't remember any time when there was peace now.
Exactly. So on both sides, since 1994, there are refugees on both sides. Like 700,000 Azeris have been expelled from Karabakh and surrounding regions that is occupied by the Armenian forces as a security zone. And also Armenians who lived in Azerbaijan left Azerbaijan and they immigrated to Armenia or other countries. So there's no any more or less peaceful cohabitation that existed between these two people, and they are both subject to a very warrior propaganda, and the nationalism is working on both sides. So now the situation is much worse in this sense, because both leaders and the leaderships of both countries say that they cannot cohabit anymore. So there should be a solution, but with a separate solution.
And when Lawrence Burrs talks about there being perhaps a bit of a COVID factor, things are not going well domestically for both sides, so you rally around the flag?
In both countries, COVID made a lot of victims, maybe a little bit more in Armenia, proportionally speaking, than in Azerbaijan. As Lawrence mentioned, in July there was an upsurge of fightings, and Azerbaijan felt like they lost a little bit of territory. It was a strategic heights that they lost, and now they want to come back to a status quo, but in a different region, much more in the south than it was previously. And also these July fightings also nullified somehow the moral superiority that Azerbaijan acquired since the war in 2016 for a few days war, when Azerbaijan this time took some positions against Armenia, and for the first time since 1994, Azerbaijan gained a little bit of territory. So they were trying to reverse the tendency that was since the 90s, and in July this moral superiority was broken. So now Azerbaijan tries to change again the balance of power, and also to show the international community that they will not accept anymore the status quo.
It's amazing when you read about it, if you don't follow it closely. Here's a conflict that predates the fall of the Soviet Union. 1988 is the starting point. Mikhail Gorbachev is the leader.
Even more, if you want to go deeper in the history, the conflict between the Azeris and Armenians, between Christians and Muslims in this region, started much earlier. In the 19th century, in 20th century, there were some clashes in different periods of times. Under the Tsarist Russia, under the communist period, during the first independences, when Armenia and Azerbaijan were independent for 2-3 years, there was a conflict between these two countries. And then under the Soviet Union, this conflict was settled in a strange way when Stalin decided to draw the borders a little bit arbitrarily, but it's like all the colonial borders. You know, in Africa, the French, the British, the Dutch, they made borders. They were artificial, but since the decolonization, these countries tried to keep these borders because redrawing these borders would make even more conflicts. Since African countries are independent, only 1 or 2 cases of changing borders occurred. And here, Armenians claimed Karabakh as the Nagorno-Karabakh, so the mountainous part of Karabakh, which is populated by Armenians, to be given to Armenia. And the Azeris, they are supporting the principle of territorial integrity. That's how the conflict has started under the Soviet period in the 80s. It was an ethnic conflict under the Soviet Union. Then it transformed itself into an interstate conflict since these two countries became independent in 1991.
And when we come back, we're going to look at the outside players, those who feel a strong allegiance to this conflict. We're thinking most notably of Turkey, where they speak a language which is the first cousin, you might say, of Azerbaijan, and as on the other side, Russia, which is watching all of this as well. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the escalation between Armenia and Azerbaijan, wondering if it could lead to all-out war, like the war that happened where an estimated 30,000 lost their lives between 1988 and 1994. We're talking about it with Thornike Gordadze, lecturer at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. From Baku, diplomat Elchin Amirbayev, former Azerbaijani ambassador to France. Welcome back as well to Tarin Papadzian, lecturer in Middle East Studies at the University of Aix-Marseille. And Lawrence Broers, Associate Fellow at the Russia and Eurasia Program of the think tank Chatham House. As Turkey and Armenia trade accusations of supplying mercenaries, the border conflict risks drawing in more nations. Delana de Souza explains.
Fighting over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh has regional heavyweight Turkey sticking out its neck. While Ankara has always been a backer of Azerbaijan, its involvement has increased in recent months. Animosity between Turkey and Armenia has been festering since the killing of some 1.5 million Armenians during World War I. Over 30 countries have labeled the killings genocide, a term rejected by Turkey. According to analysts, it views the current conflict as an opportunity to flex its muscle on the world stage, while appealing to anti-Armenian sentiment at home.
Everyone must know that the relationship between Turkey and Azerbaijan is one of two countries, one people. We are one and together always, through pain and through pride. Again today, we are by the side of Azerbaijan in the defense of their lands.
High-level meetings are frequent between the two sides, and in the first 8 months of 2020, Turkish energy imports from Azerbaijan increased 25%. Closer ties with Turkey has given Baku the confidence to stand up to Russia. Moscow remains Armenia's closest ally in the conflict, although has relations with both sides.
Russia has always taken an equally weighted position. It's this position that gives Russia an opportunity to use its influence and traditionally friendly relations with both sides, with Azerbaijan and Armenia, in order to resolve this conflict.
The European Union too is calling on all sides to refrain from violence, warning of the risk to regional stability.
Lawrence Burrs, how far will Turkey go in supporting Azerbaijan?
Well, that's a very important question. As your presenter indicated, Turkish solidarity and empathy with Azerbaijan has been there from the early stages of the conflict. Turkey closed its recently opened border with Armenia in April 1993 in protest at occupation of the Kalbajar region adjacent to Nagorno-Karabakh. After that, there was an attempt at rapprochement between Turkey and Armenia in 2009, 2010, that unfortunately failed. And I think what we've seen is a growing explicitness to Turkish support. So in 2016, Turkey declared that it would unconditionally support Azerbaijan to the end. The same happened in July of this year. And I think there has basically been a new kind of relationship. We saw exchanges, meetings between senior defense officials of the two countries after the July escalation. And I think perhaps Turkey is seeing this conflict as another regional theater where it can probe for influence, for foreign policy influence, where it can showcase its military hardware, developing the Turkish army industry is a major domestic imperative. And there are reports that Turkish drone technology is in use in the combat zone at the moment. Now, that doesn't mean that Turkey would look to become more actively involved or would seek a direct confrontation with Russia. I think it's more about lending capability short of actual warfare, capability where there is a degree of plausible deniability about it, rather than explicitly having boots on the ground, so to speak. So I think there is, a combination of overt diplomatic support and perhaps less overt, more covert military support to Azerbaijan.
One monitoring group that follows Syria, Lawrence, wrote on its website, based in London, wrote on its website that there had been Turkish-backed mercenaries who'd gone last week from Syria to Azerbaijan. Again, it's what we were saying in part one of our discussion. How do you confirm something like this?
Well, it's very difficult to confirm. What we would need to see is photographic evidence from the ground. The claim is that private Turkish firms have been recruiting mercenaries, pro-Turkish militia mercenaries from Syria and bringing them into Azerbaijan. As we noted earlier, there are conflicting claims of mercenaries fighting on the Armenian side that are circulating in the Azerbaijani media. This may be a tactic to reduce, if it's true, to reduce the number of casualties. Azerbaijani killed in action statistics are quite hard to come by. They're considered to be a state secret, and I think the population is quite sensitive to casualties, and using mercenaries may be a way to reduce the impact of high casualties in the fighting. But as I said, we don't have confirmation of that. We would hope to have that confirmation in the coming days, if indeed it is true.
Elchin Amirbayov, you heard from Lawrence Burrs there that Turkey does feel a strong kinship with Azerbaijan, but it's also got an eye to all those different irons it's got in the fires in various other places, and its relationship with Russia. There's only so far the Turks will go?
Well, let me just tell you that to start with, Turkey is not at all a newcomer to the peace process in Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. It's a full-fledged member of the Minsk group, which consists of 11 countries, including Azerbaijan and Armenia. Yet it's an ally and closest friend of Azerbaijan, who stands for restoration of just peace in the South Caucasus through the elimination of consequences of Armenian aggression and, of course, ending the illegal occupation. Basically, Turkey said what other major stakeholders are shy to admit, that Nagorno-Karabakh is occupied by Armenia. And since the start of yesterday's escalation, Turkey condemned the military provocation of Armenia at the time when Armenia seeks to secure the support and involvement on its side of outside players like CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, presence of Turkey and its solidarity with Azerbaijan should rather be seen as a stabilizing and counterbalancing factor in regional conflict. If you allow me, I will just go for 10 seconds to the July aggression, when actually Armenia started a provocation at the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which was far away from the line of contact in the occupied territories. And the three major goals that they had was to strengthen internal positions of Nagorno-Karabakh, rallying Armenians around the flag, and distract the attention from harsh local economic and social realities exacerbated further by pandemia. The second one was to involve third-party CSTO, claiming that they have allied commitment to support Armenia. And the third one was to threaten and eventually sabotage the southern gas corridor and other critical infrastructure, which is passing through Tovuz region, just in the vicinity of that provocation. So Azerbaijan responded proportionally, but it did not fall into the Armenian trap and did not advance into the territory of Armenia, because we don't have any military targets in the territory of Armenia. Our goal is to stop the illegal occupation of Azerbaijani land, and to make sure that the cleansed population, as a result of this occupation, can have the chance to go back to their home.
Let me bring in Talin Papazian on the point you made earlier, which is you said that Turkey's involvement is a stabilizing factor. Do you agree, Talin?
It would be hard to agree with that. If you look at the Karabakh conflict and Turkey's positions in international arenas in the last month or even the last 2 or 3 years, you have to look at that conflict within a global theater of Turkey's war in the Middle Eastern region. And for the last month, even in Western Europe. So Turkey is not a de-escalating factor, it's an aggravating factor of the regional tensions. And it was said earlier that Turkey is part of the Minsk group. It is true because the Minsk group has a wider format. However, the Minsk group, with its co-chairmanship of 3 co-presidents, which is the only one to have a mandate to lead discussions on the Karabakh conflict, has 3 countries, Russia, France, and the United States, and Turkey is nowhere in the scene.
Tornike Gordadze, at this point, what is Turkey's and what's its ultimate goal? Again, is it more about domestic politics? Is it about backing Azerbaijan? Is it about all the other conflicts?
No, it's a combination of internal and external issues, of course, because as it was said earlier, Turkey is now much more proactive and present and not hesitating to send military forces abroad. We've seen them in Syria, Iraq, Libya. So the Turkey of 2020 is different from Turkey of the 90s. Lawrence said that Turkey was already supporting Azerbaijan, but at this time Turkey was not ready at all to participate militarily in this conflict. Now we see the Turkish leadership to be much more assertive and to claim that they will support Azerbaijan in case if Azerbaijan demands Turkish intervention. But to be honest, so far, Russia's influence in this region was much higher and in this conflict than Turkey. Turkey's interest and Turkey's involvement is growing because the level that Turkey and Azerbaijan cooperation reached in military sphere is unprecedented. But until now and until 2-3 years ago, Russia was the country.
And we saw in that report a measured response from the Kremlin.
Yes, because Russia is now in a difficult situation. So far, the status quo was was what Russia really wanted. Because maintaining the status quo, Russia was holding these 2 countries, Azerbaijan and Armenia. Russia was as a broker, and almost as a unique broker. Russia is one of the 3 co-chairs of Minsk group, but much more influential than 2 others, the United States and France, to be honest. And as a rule, the United States States and France were following or sometimes disagreeing, but they had no influence enough in the region to block or to counter Russia's influence. So far, Russia was much more influential. Status quo was in Russia's interest. Now there are countries, especially Azerbaijan plus Turkey, who don't agree with the status quo, and Russia doesn't want to lose Azerbaijan completely, so they act with lots of. They try not to be very active and to show support for Armenia as they were doing in the 90s. But they are in a difficult situation. They cannot. They see the situation is evolving, so they want to keep as much influence as they can.
Lawrence Burrs, every time we've seen over the last couple of years, right, be it in Syria, in Libya. We see Turkey and Russia on opposite sides, and we think, oh, this time, that's it. The relationship is going to go to hell in a handbasket, and somehow it doesn't. What's going to happen this time around? Could there be Ankara and Moscow could really have a serious falling out?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer and to prognose. The question is the extent to which these outside powers are willing to risk becoming embroiled in a conflict involving much smaller powers, a complex, really embedded conflict. As I said before, I don't think that Turkey is really looking for an open confrontation with Russia. There are various other policy fields in which Russia and Turkey have a cooperative relationship with one another. I think the stakes, in a way, are much more significant for Russia, because Russia's single most important source of leverage in the South Caucasus is this conflict, is the non-resolved nature of the conflict. At the same time, Russia is the only outside power that has treaty obligations in the event of major warfare hitting the territory of Armenia. And so it is perhaps the outside power that is most invested in not seeing a large-scale war that would trigger those treaty obligations. So in that sense, Russia's goals are very inconsistent, quite incoherent. And we've seen that in Russian policy. It is a security guarantor for Armenia. It supplies arms to both sides, and it sees itself as the first among equals amongst the mediator nations. Now, that incoherence so far has created a lot of uncertainty, and that has benefited Russia. It has produced caution, particularly in Azerbaijan, not wanting to see itself isolated in a conflict with Armenia backed by Russia. And I think, Turkey's involvement in the context is supporting Azerbaijan, reducing the risk of isolation and challenging Russia. So I think the real stakes are for Russia, for Russia's reputation as the arbiter of stability in the South Caucasus. And so, I think a real question in the coming days, if there is going to be a desire for a counteroffensive amongst Armenian forces, will Russia be able to restrain that and to impose, as it has done in the past, another ceasefire agreement affirming its own influence?
Elchin Amirbayev, what does happen if there's a counteroffensive? What does Russia do?
Well, basically, I'm glad that this point was raised, because let me tell you that why this all happened and reached this point, because Armenia, unfortunately, was enjoying the sense of impunity with all the series of provocations that I mentioned at the beginning. And I think that position of Azerbaijan here is quite clear. We remain committed to a just, peaceful settlement, but we do not accept any more procrastination or imitation of talks. We want a clear-cut agenda to tackle the outstanding substantial issues blocking the progress in the peaceful settlement. And we want a more robust, efficient, and action-oriented mediation by the co-chairs, all of which, and I agree, I tend to disagree here with Mr. Gorbadze, who said that Russia would like to preserve the status quo. I think, at least formally, the three heads of state of the three co-chair countries on numerous occasions have mentioned that the current status quo is unacceptable and not sustainable. And I think that is the major message that
not sustainable, but is it in Russia's interest?
Well, basically, Russia as well as Turkey, they should be interested that the eventual long-term stability and security in the South Caucasus could be preserved, because going out of hand of the situation is pregnant with very unpredictable consequences, not only for the countries involved, by the broader region. And I think what is important here is to mention that, again, one has to say enough is enough to the clear violation of international humanitarian law. Someone mentioned the casualties. I will give you some numbers because it has been this time again, like it was in July, Armenia targeted by artillery and mortar fire civilian population living in frontline areas, killing since yesterday 9 people and wounding 31 Azerbaijani civilians, including school children, elderly people, women, and men. And actually, it reminds me of the worst episode in this conflict, and I think Lawrence would agree with that, and that is the massacre, the act of genocide in Khojaly in 1992, when 613 civilian Azerbaijanis have been annihilated only because they were ethnically Azerbaijanis.
Talin Papazian, let me bring you in here and just ask you, who's going to break the stalemate at this point?
It's very complicated. It's the most complicated question. If I want to add something about Russia, is the following, is that Russia has actually no real interest, I agree with my colleagues, in seeing the status quo broken, because if anything happens at the international border between Armenia and Turkey, and we were speaking of the extent of the level of Turkey's involvement in this conflict, then Russia would have to intervene if Armenia asks for that intervention. So as far as the conflict remains, if I can say it that way, local in Nagorno-Karabakh, between the Karabakhi army and the Azerbaijani armed forces, then Russia can play on, maintaining the stalemate and using this leverage. But Russia doesn't want to lose Armenia. Armenia is the only loyal partner of Russia in the South Caucasus, and it also has a very strong interest to maintain that relationship the way it is.
Very quickly, Tornike Gordadze, who's more overstretched? Is it Turkey? We've mentioned all the various. I didn't even mention the Eastern Mediterranean, where it's at odds with Greece and Italy and France. It's got Libya, it's got Syria. Or is it Russia, which has a Navalny problem, which has Belarus right now, which has Ukraine? Or maybe neither are overstretched. I don't know.
No, they are both overstretched. But to come back to this Russia-Turkey relations, we have seen this rapprochement in recent years. There were ups and downs. We remember when the Turks
it's a strange dance.
Yeah, it's a very strange dance. Basically, the interests, immediate interests, geopolitical interests in Eastern Mediterranean, in the Balkans, in the Caucasus, are opposite between Turkey and Russia. But what brings them together is their disappointment or their opposition to the West. Because in recent years, both for various reasons, very different reasons, but Russia and Turkey were very much disappointed in the West. So they are playing this alliance in front of the West, but in almost all other files, they remain opposed, including in this region. And Turkey and Azerbaijan are on one side. They want to change the status quo, influence the negotiating process to make it more favorable to Azerbaijan. And Armenia, of course, wants to maintain the status quo. And Russia is playing, of course, as it was mentioned before.
Tornike Gordadze, I want to thank you. I want to thank Elchin Amirbayev for being with us from the Azerbaijani capital, Baku, Talin Papazian in Aix-en-Provence, Lawrence Burrs in London. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Yenna Lee.
Hi, Francois.
So I got to say, Twitter was on fire this morning over this story.
Indeed. Francois, the military campaign on the ground is also being followed up by a media campaign. Both sides, Armenia and Azerbaijan, very quick to post images and videos to rally support on their own side. Here we see a tweet by the government of Armenia, saying Azerbaijan continues targeting Armenian villages with pictures of bombed out villages. On the other hand, we also see the Azerbaijani Ministry of Foreign Affairs retweeted this video montage that comes from their embassy in Los Angeles, saying that Armenia is targeting innocent Azerbaijani civilians. As you can imagine, this kind of conflict is obviously very polarizing. It gives way to a lot of polarized reactions on social media, a lot of nationalistic, a lot of patriotic sentiments you can see all over the internet. And you can really see it in the hashtags that people have been using, such as the hashtag Karabakh is Azerbaijan. You'll also see stuff like stop Armenian occupation. On the other hand, you'll see stop Azerbaijani aggression, Artsakh strong, which is another name for Nagorno-Karabakh. An important reminder for our viewers, though, Azerbaijan restricted internet access over the weekend, which means that there's been a lot less activity on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on WhatsApp. All of this because the Transport Ministry there said that it wanted to prevent Armenian provocations. This kind of story is, of course, no means very light. It's a very serious kind of situation. But there is one comedian, Armenian comedian, who has tried to find some irony in the situation. He's posted this meme: when you learn your expensive Syrian mercenaries are dying like flies. He's of course referring to the Armenian accusations that Azerbaijan is using Syrian soldiers, fighters sent by Turkey, a claim that Baku has denied and said is complete nonsense. I'd also like to finish with this tweet by Thomas Duval. He's a senior fellow at Carnegie Europe. He warns us that there's a lot of propaganda out there. Both sides cannot be right. Both sides cannot be wrong, he says. He reminds us to treat all official statements from both sides with a big pinch of salt.
All right, message received. Many thanks for that, Ian. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. Oh, we're still on TV.